all of our tasters agreed that the best tasting sweeter banana was the organic one. It was very interesting to see that people could really tell which one was which when it came to the fresh food. When the question of sustainability came into play, the opinions were split again. Here are two examples of opinions we heard.
In terms of sustainability, what type of agriculture do you think is better, industrial or organic?
Organic, because then they don't have all the added chemicals in it.
Now, do you think organic or industrial is closer to achieving sustainable food sources?
I want to say, for some reason, industrial, because I feel like that's more like economically feasible than organic. But I feel like you're going to slap me in the face and tell me that organic is better.
The opinions as to which was more sustainable were about split down the middle, although there was a little bit more of a pull for organic. As we learned from McWilliams' Professor Ferris and Michael Pollan, what is sold as organic is rarely something that should be considered sustainable. According to Pollan, in a chapter from The Omnivore's Dilemma entitled Big Organic, the organic label is a marketing tool, and he claims that to the eye, organic farms look exactly like any other industrial farm. And as examined earlier, industrial farms are not sustainable. But organic farms are supposed to be natural, so why are they often just as bad as conventional farms? Organic agriculture is often praised as a clean or pure alternative to the chemically intensive practices of industrialized agriculture, claims McWilliams, but 5% of all fossil fuel goes towards manufacturing the organic fertilizer that organic farmers use. Organic farms also use natural pesticides, and McWilliams makes the point that they are not necessarily less worrisome because they are natural. So, if organic isn't the answer, what is? We asked Professor Ferris and Aubrey this question, and here are their responses.
What else can we do to improve our food system?
I really think that scale of production is an issue. I think that the last couple of years with the recession, we've seen a lot more people doing things like vegetable gardening. And I know when I was growing up, we used to can corn and tomatoes and stuff all the time, and you'd have those during the winter. And I think that, it's in an urban area, of course, it's a little more difficult. A lot of people live in places where if they wanted to take the time, they could actually do a lot of sort of self-produced food. Now, maybe not chickens and cows and so on, but there's a lot more local, sustainable production going on. I know that my family, we buy chickens and turkeys and other stuff from local, sustainable producers. And again, I differentiate between going to the grocery store and buying organic food from buying sustainable food. And sustainability is a difficult buzzword to really understand, and I think that with that said, most of us sort of know it when we see it. So small scale production, it doesn't necessarily require long distance transport, is probably something that we're going to be moving towards.
Do you have any ideas of what we could do in the future to possibly move towards more sustainable food sources as the population is growing?
So sustainable food sources, how do you define that according, or
just a way to preserve the environment and yet still be able to feed the growing population on the planet.
Yeah. I know there's been a lot of interest in having people consume more local food rather than having to ship it far distances. And so I guess if you were able to develop different centers, different cities, maybe if you had more availability of produce or other things that would be locally grown, that might be a way to reduce the amount of costs and energy intensiveness of more large scale operations. Other things again that I touched on before, but trying to avoid over fertilization and over intensive use of the land, which could lead to erosion and then make things less productive down the road. Those would be a couple things, and I know there's technologies around that that I think lots of folks are using already, even in large operations. But GPS aided fertilizer applications. So if you have a map of your whole acreage where you're planting things, you might know, okay, soil in this area is lacking in phosphorus, soil in this area is lacking in nitrogen. So rather than applying excess of all of those nutrients to all of the land, you sort of low, and then that can keep the biomass produced on those lands high without over-fertilizing, which, as I said before, doesn't necessarily adversely affect the food production, but can affect other ecosystems.
Both professors seem to think that focusing on local food production would be the best route. Also, finding new technologies that would allow more accurate fertilization and pesticide distribution would help create a more sustainable food culture. Michael Pollan suggested to his readers that the most sustainable food system could be buying local. But as pointed out by Professor Ferris, that wouldn't be entirely feasible, especially in Minnesota, where a growing season would last only a few months. James E. McWilliams also fights back against Pollan in Just Food, where he points out the problem of our population. There's no way that we could go back to only making food for our small communities. Our society has gone too global for that, and there are too many of us. A truly sustainable food culture would create a happy medium between all of our current food systems. Our sustainable food system would incorporate biodiversity, which would help the planet maintain its balance and would allow for a balance in agriculture where no land would be overused. It would also put an emphasis on buying local when the available local foods are in season and are grown without harming the earth. If we want to develop a sustainable food system, we also need to think about the food that we waste. We must no longer overproduce commodity crops like corn and eat the food that we buy. Eating real whole foods could also help the environment. The production of processed foods uses up many resources and promotes overproduction. We should also focus on eating less meat in our culture. This would not only promote a healthy planet, but promote health in ourselves, since meat is associated with cardiovascular disease, obesity, and other diet-induced diseases. Genetically modified foods could be a huge part of sustainability as well, if used to decrease the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. A sustainable food culture is something that America could achieve if we're willing to sacrifice some of our food junkie ways.
I think that local food could definitely be an important part of the future of the sustainable food system. I don't think it's something that should be relied upon, but I definitely think it could be an important part in areas that are able to grow local food year-round. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with that. I think it's kind of an equation. We can't rely on just one thing to become, a sustainable food system. We need to, put together a bunch of different things. And the thing with local in places like Minnesota, it's not going to work so well, especially in the wintertime. We'd have to just produce massive amounts of food and then store it for the winter and figure out things to do with that on a local level, which would be extremely difficult. Now, places like California happen to have an ideal agricultural system where they can, or almost always feed the population on local food. But in general, it's just got to be part of the equation. When we can buy locally here in the summertime, great. But other times we're going to have to rely on other parts of the U.S. and the world to help meet our food needs.